Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation. This video may be controversial, however, it shouldn't be. But nonetheless, the reality is the dollar is too big to fail. At least it is for now. And in this video, I'll explain why as we explore. The dollar and gold. Those are the two things that we think about most often in this community, for sure. In fact, I would dare say that the dollar dominates the conversations of even us who accumulate gold and silver. And we've been told time and time again, and I myself have stressed this point, that we should think in terms of ounces of these, gold or silver, rather than dollars, or valuing gold and silver in ounces rather than dollars. Nonetheless, the fact remains that we have to be price conscious, because that's what we've been really told to believe and understand. That's how the world works. We use the dollar every single day, and you could substitute it for any currency that you're using, but no matter what country you live in. But regardless, 60% of the world, their currency and the transactions and reserves are in dollars. So the dollar is dominating. Now I'm going to show you something that's going to be really triggering for a lot of people out there. But nonetheless, we must take this for what it is, the truth of the matter. And in reality, this headline is kind of troubling to think about, but in a sense, it's a little bit comforting too, because we have a little bit of time left. Fears that the U.S. dollar will collapse are nonsense, and doomsayers are often hawking gold, investment chief says. This is from Markets Insider from earlier last month. This is about a month old. Let's see what some of this article talks about here, and what we can take from this piece here. I always think it's good to take a look at a contrarian point of view for some of these things. Fears that the U.S. dollar will crash are completely overblown, as the greenback cannot be replaced anytime soon, according to the CIO of the Commonwealth Financial Network wrote in a recent blog post. And the article continues down here and says, as long as the U.S. is the largest open trading economy, as long as everyone in the world wants access to the U.S. economy, and as long as it is a lot of work and the great inconvenience to switch, the position of the dollar as the global reserve currency is secure, he wrote. What can you take from this little paragraph, a couple of sentences here, that stands out to you? Well, it's these words here, as long as. In other words, it's all based off of faith and convenience. And right now, folks, the dollar is convenient, and a lot of people have faith in it, including our enemies. But nonetheless, let's talk a little bit about this de-dollarization and what's going on here. Here's a couple of infographics I'm going to show you here. This one is de-dollarization and countries seeking alternatives to the U.S. dollar. Make no mistake, de-dollarization is happening, and it has been happening for quite some time. In fact, the biggest example of that we'll see in this infographic goes back to 2014. Let's see if we can make an understanding of this. But first, in order to understand de-dollarization, we have to first understand the dollar's dominance and how it got there. This infographic, it kind of illustrates fairly well, but there's one part of this infographic that is missing. I'm going to fill in that gap here, because what I'm going to share with you is how the dollar really became to be the dominant currency in the world. Let's look at this timeline. In the 1920s, the dollar begins to displace the pound sterling as an international reserve currency after the First World War. The United States is a significant recipient of wartime gold inflows at that time. Essentially, it was around the end of World War I where virtually overnight the dollar became the dominant reserve currency in the world. Keep in mind that it was at that time when it was Woodrow Wilson who championed this idea of a global organization known as the League of Nations, and also was that time when the Federal Reserve System was formed. As it was only a couple of years in after that had occurred. Now, fast forward to 1944, during the height of the World War II, international trade is conducted using the U.S. dollar under the Bretton Woods Agreement. So what does that mean? Well, international trade was conducted using the U.S. dollar only because they could use those dollars to cash out in gold. In other words, we were still on a gold standard. It was just not a direct gold standard. Now, fast forward to the 1960s, European and Japanese exports become more competitive with U.S. exports. There is a large supply of dollars around the world, making it difficult to back dollars with gold. And this is still under the Bretton Woods system. And because there were so many dollars out there and not enough gold, it was difficult to make that, to back those dollars up with it. And by the way, largely, a lot of those countries, save for France, I think at the time, they really didn't care to get the gold because dollars were good enough. As long as the dollars were backed by gold, then it was fine. Fast forward to August of 1971, when Richard Milhous Nixon, the president at the time, ceased the direct convertibility of U.S. dollars to gold. The window was practically closed at that point. He just closed it all the way. And that leaves a gaping hole. Even though the dollar was still dominant, there was nothing to back it up other than the full faith and credit of the United States government, which was probably good enough, but Henry Kissinger, Secretary of the State at the time, in 1973, this is the part that's missing that's crucially important, made the trade of oil, mainly coming out of Aramco in Saudi Arabia, trading in dollars. In other words, that was the beginning of the petrodollar system, a system which, like it or not, even today we are still using to some extent. So the petrodollar sealed the deal for the dollar as being the dominant currency, and that is the most important reason why you are seeing 60% of transactions and reserves, foreign currency reserves, utilizing the dollar. Now, let's fast forward to 1981. After years of hyperinflation, the U.S. dollar loses 2/3 of its purchasing power. And by the way, we are in an inflationary period right now. It is the worst since this time, although it's not necessarily hyperinflation. We are in an inflationary environment now, and it's slowing down, but only gradually at this point. Then, fast forward dramatically into the 2007 and 2008 financial crisis, which was global, and investors seek U.S. dollars expecting the currency to retain its value. A lot of flood and there was no inflation then, by the way, but a lot of currency was being printed just at the outset of this, and a lot of that currency went around the world. This is why you did not see inflation occur then, because those dollars were being sent all around the world to shore up other nations and to keep the global system, stable. But nonetheless, if those dollars were to flood back, we would see a hyperinflationary situation here yet again. Now, fast forward to 2014, and this is a very important time because this was after Russia has annexed Crimea, illegally, by the way. Russia prioritizes de-dollarization in response to Western sanctions. So they already had practice in doing this before, and that was one nation. And by the way, Russia's economy at the time, and even now today, is only about the size of Italy's, so it really didn't have that much of an impact. However, fast forward to last year in 2022, central banks bought gold at the fastest pace since 1967. I've covered this story extensively on this channel. The war in Ukraine results in Western sanctions against Russia. As a result, Russia and China deepen cooperation between their financial systems, with ruble-yuan trade increasing 80 times at a rate of 18 times over the past 8 months. And we can see this chart shows it. Now, that's just between two nations, but nonetheless, it has trickled out to other nations around the world. In fact, I've documented that as well. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, thinking about taking yuan for trade. In fact, here we can see in 2023 more of this. Many of this I documented on this channel as well. De-dollarization is happening in some cases. Here, Brazil and Argentina discussed the creation of a common currency. The UAE and India explore the use of rupees to trade non-oil commodities. Russia and Iran are working together to launch a cryptocurrency backed by gold. But despite these movements, few expect to see the end of the dollar's global sovereign status anytime soon. So currently, central banks still hold about 60% of their foreign exchange reserves in dollars. That's a huge chunk. The euro comes in at a distant second with 19.7. But look, all these other currencies much further left. So the dollar still dominates by far across the board. And so this, folks, is why we are at a point now where we can see that the dollar is not going to fall anytime soon. This is why we can have a massive debt here in the United States, and this is what this visualization is about. And this talks about how much the U.S. debt has gone. This says $31.4 trillion. That's the cap as we head into these talks here to raise the debt ceiling. But what it is really now, if you look at this, USDebtClock.org, and considering they raise the debt ceiling, it'll be $31.746 trillion. Crazy, insane. With a debt to GDP ratio at 120.34%. That's wartime. I think it was only higher in World War II, which was at 129% of GDP. Nonetheless, our debt is insane. Look at this. If you look at it and visualize with $1 bill, as you can see here, there's a dollar in the hand of a lady. There's what $100,000 bills looks like. That's what $1,000 bills look like. That's what 10,000 of them look like. 1 million, 10 million. There's 1 billion. And there's 1 billion in that one little stack there, stacked together. And this is what 1 trillion looks like. $1 trillion stacked up compared to $747 bills, if they were actually do that. Then you take that 1 trillion, stack all these together. We're talking about essentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7.5, 7 3/4, 7 7/8 Willis Towers. I'm not talking about Bruce Willis Towers or what you're talking about Willis Towers. We're talking about the old Sears Tower in Chicago, the tallest building in the Western world. Yes, indeed. That is a lot of debt. And so the debt equivalent is about $94,000 per U.S. citizen. And how did it get so high? Well, it's pretty simple. The U.S. national debt is how much money the federal government owes to creditors. When the government spends more than it earns, it has a budget deficit and must issue debt in the form of Treasury securities. The U.S. has run a deficit in the last 20 years, substantially increasing the national debt. In fact, according to the Department of Treasury, the current debt capped at $31.4 trillion. And, this also talks a little bit about the pros of a debt. The U.S. debt helps fund critical programs for Americans. Well, are they really that critical? Includes retirement and disability benefits, health care, economic security, and national defense. Yeah, national defense is constitutional. The others may be critical for those who rely on them. Some of them are entitlements that we've been forced to participate in, like Social Security, which is one big fat scam, by the way. There's no question. If I could opt out of Social Security, you could keep all the money. I would rather do it and just take the money that I earn from here on out, even though I'm much closer to the... If it would make more sense if I was younger. But even now, I think I could get a better return on my dollars, even at a high inflation rate, than what the Social Security system has, which is going to go bankrupt. There's no question. But nonetheless, that is one of the things. So income security, nearly half the percent of the population living below the poverty line in 2019. The impact of these programs. But that's not what the role of government is. Now, the thing is yeah, that seems like the pro of debt. But what does debt do? It means that people have less faith. If you're owed to a debtor nation, even of the United States, somewhere, somehow, something's got to give. We can keep the can down the road by providing these programs, but what's going to happen when people lose faith in it? Everything is going to crumble, fall like a house of cards. No question about that. And by the way, I'm not saying all debt is bad, by the way. When you buy a house, you go into debt to have that house. You are paying that debt down, though. And that's the difference, is you are shrinking that debt, which includes the interest you pay on that debt when you have a mortgage. and you buy a house from within your means to be able to make that payment. They say that I think whenever you have your mortgage payment, it should not be more than a third of your income per year. And so there's fiscally responsible ways to get into debt, and that is what I would be considered as good debt. And it's only good if you can immediately start to tackle it. In other words, you pay down with principal and interest, with an emphasis on principal. Ever since I've had a mortgage, I always pay more than the minimum and put that extra money towards principal. It's the best way to do. That's the only way that debt is good, to be able to benefit you with a roof over your head, so that you're, instead of paying rent, you're paying mortgage that goes into equity into your home. But nonetheless, that's where we are at. And what is it about the dollar and why it's too big to fail now? Because a lot of people have faith in it, including us. But it is only until we lose faith that the dollar will last. Because once that faith fails, then the dollar is out of there. And that's going to be something that we're going to have to potentially tackle down the road. I don't know how long that will take, but we hear more and more chipping away at the dollar's dominance, and we see more and more nations like Egypt start to trade either in other currencies and or gold, like Zimbabwe, as I've covered that topic recently. Well, there you go. And then you're going to see more and more people realize, you know what, maybe we're not so keen on this cotton linen note known as the dollar, that debt instrument, but we are keen on something that's lasted a whole lot longer, and that's gold. Now, how can we save the dollar from failing? Well, we could tie it to gold itself. We supposedly have over 8,100 tons of gold in our vaults, far more than any other nation in the world by a long stretch, which means that we could tie our dollars to it, but we would be constraining our currency supply and our value based off of it, but would certainly solidify the dollar's dominance, not because we say so, but because we back it by gold. So there you have it. Let me know what your thoughts are. But until such a time as this, until such a time as that, the dollar will remain king. And by the way, the dollar will remain king even if they move to central bank digital currency, because many people will be fooled by that, thinking, oh, it's very secure and fast, and you can be able to exchange it between central banks, between nations, and between each other domestically and globally. Seems like a nice, convenient system under the Federal Reserve. But as long as they have that faith and people believe in it, it will last. As for me, well, yeah, I hold dollars. I understand it, even as money. I've talked about that in the past too. But it's unsound money because it's inflating, and it's only based off of what everybody says it is. But I tell you what we know that has last the annals of time and history is gold. So that's why I hold gold as well. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.